Spring break? Not for us. A preview of Nebraska's spring is to come, starting with a big question at running back.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins.
All right, and that's an important note, everybody, because we have received our brackets, and the NCAA tournament is indeed here. If you were holding out any hope that Nebraska was going to make the big dance, you were disappointed on Sunday evening.
Didn't happen.
No, didn't happen. Or Sunday afternoon, depending on where you're at, Mitch.
Yeah, I'm out here in the Mountain Standard Time in Arizona, so I'm 2 hours behind you there, Connor, in the Central Time Zone. You've been a traveling man. I'm still a traveling man today on Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. There's a bracket right there that Connor has. If you're watching us on YouTube,
and it's spectacular.
I will be maybe going to drink a green beer in Surprise, Arizona. Today at the Royals Diamondbacks game. Went to a Royals game on Friday, missed a huge comeback that the Royals minor leaguers made because had to get in the car and do some driving. But the Royals won in Tempe where they were playing the Angels. I saw that and some of that, and I'll be watching more spring training as this week goes on. I guess there's going to be snow in Nebraska. Not looking forward to coming back to that. And you've been with your radio friends, in New York. How was New York?
It was lovely. You know, we got like one pretty nice sunny day weather-wise, but the weather doesn't really matter all that much when you're all tucked in the buildings. Got the first chance of my life to see inside of Madison Square Garden and watched 3 pretty solid basketball games. More than 3. But 3 involving Creighton in the Big East tournament. That was a heck of a time. Then got back to Omaha on Sunday morning, and it's a little chillier here. I don't know what we're in for a wild weather couple days here.
I just know it's 84 today, Monday, in Phoenix. Yeah. It hasn't been like that, but that's what we're gonna get today. The sun is intense, they say down here. So I'm gonna have to.
That's okay.
Be in some shade or something.
You rub it in. You don't have to worry about anybody else's weather right now until you arrive back in Omaha later on in the week. Okay. So we can have more on the tournament a little bit later on in the show or whatever you guys would like to get to.
Mavs are in.
They're dancing. They're facing off against Rick Pitino. They're going to Providence. I can tell you a lot about St. John's. I've seen them a lot over the last couple of days, but. Let's go to Nebraska football, who is off from spring ball. This is the dead week as it is spring break. But they'll return on March 24th, a week from today, to start their spring ball. And what we're going to do this week is we're going to sort of roll through a bunch of questions that we have. Take a look at some individual positions. Matt Rhule has survived the off season, not without making national headlines a couple times. But it's year 3 and it's a huge year for Nebraska football. And we got a big spring to preview. So 4 episodes this week, barring big news that wrecks our plans. And today we're going to be looking, with the mailbag on Friday. Today we'll be looking at the offensive skill. Tuesday we'll be looking at the bigs. And then we'll look at the defensive side and both the skill and the bigs as well on Wednesday and Thursday. Let's get started. All right. So offensive skill, we got quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs. There's a lot to dive into. There's a lot of questions. There's been a lot of change this past offseason over the last couple months. What hits your head first, Mitch, when you think about Nebraska's skill on the offensive side?
So we're going to put tight ends with the big group, with the size on Tuesday, just to in case you tuned into this episode to hear about Heinrich Harburg. He's now an offensive big. We'll discuss the tight ends on Tuesday. So Yeah, QBs, wide receivers, running backs. I think obviously you start with the quarterbacks, and we've talked a lot on this show about Dylan Raiola's growth and what's expected of him in year 2 as Nebraska's starting quarterback. I think, it's easy to overlook just the simple fact that Nebraska has a starting quarterback in spring practice. These kinds of situations are a luxury for a college football team in the transfer portal era. Nebraska's been through it quite a bit before, has had a lot of multi-year starters, Adrian Martinez being the most recent example. But, you have injuries, you have changes at coordinator spots, at head coach spots, and it jumbles it up. Right now, Nebraska's in a spot to have stability at that quarterback spot. And for me, that's about the biggest upside that exists for the Huskers at the offensive skill positions. Like, they've got the hierarchy of Matt Rhule and Dana Holgorsen and Glenn Thomas and then Dylan Raiola. And even if you want to go down the pecking order, something that we heard from Matt Rhule at his press conference last Tuesday is about what Nebraska has behind Dylan Raiola. There was a question about Marcos Davila, the transfer from Purdue, who's coming in as a second-year college player. And instead of going there, Rhule went to Jalen Gramstad and said, I'm really excited about what we have in Jalen Gramstad coming back for a second year. I mean, of course, they sought to get Davila, but the backup right now to start spring practice is Jalen Gramstad. So I think that's that security, that stability, the consistency that Nebraska has at the QB spot, it is going to serve it well in getting the most that it can out of this spring offensively.
Yeah, it's a room that is sort of it worked itself out. Obviously, you're always going to generally like the position that you have when you have a returning starting quarterback, especially one with the talent level that Dylan Raiola has. But I mean, there's always been years. I mean, even in the Adrian years when you were sure about what was going to happen at the starting quarterback, you weren't sure about what was going to happen behind him. And not that you're going to get good play, but I think Nebraska feels comfortable with the safety net that they have behind him with Gramstad, with Davila, with TJ Lateef, who, doesn't have to play this year. And then a quarterback committed for the 2026 class as well. So like it looks right. There's not any questions right now about, hey, after spring, does Nebraska need to go back in the portal and maybe find somebody who wants to catch on for a year or two? Not a question at this moment, which is a luxury.
Here's a way to gauge it. Think about a year ago at this time and how much urgency there was around the two true freshman quarterbacks who came in, Raiola and Daniel Kalen. That was the number one storyline of the spring. Can Nebraska get these two guys ready? Or Raiola was the presumptive favorite among those two, but the coaches they talked about both of them together at all times, along with Heinrich Harburg. The true freshman quarterback, the early enrollee in spring camp this year, there's no pressure on TJ Lateef. Nope. Like we didn't even get to him until 3 or 4 minutes into this conversation, and that's no knock on TJ Lateef. That speaks to what Nebraska has done at that position to get it in good order in one season. So Lateef can come along at a more favorable pace for him. He can use this spring to learn from all three of the quarterbacks ahead of him. And I continue to go back to if you're going to talk about like a dark horse storyline at quarterback, like everyone is going to obsess about Raiola's leadership, his maturity, like the buzzword of March 2025 for Nebraska football. It's 2 words: body composition. This is the thing. What we're not talking about, I did talk about it a minute ago, but Gramstad and what he could. You don't want to be in a spot where Jalen Gramstad has to start against Cincinnati on August 28th because something happened to Dylan 3 weeks into preseason camp. But if you need him to step up, I feel like he's ready. And I feel like he's somebody that would move the offense, and Nebraska wouldn't have to do all that much to scale things back.
he'd be a backup quarterback, but he'd be a replacement level backup quarterback for Nebraska, which there is like a comfort there. It's a warm, cozy blanket. And then if not, we'll see what Marcos Davila. I'm interested to hear about what's said about him this spring. But obviously, the big question in the group, aside from body composition with Raiola, is what does a year 2 look like for him? So just to reset real quick. Last year, he throws for 2,800 yards over 13 games. He completes 67% of his passes. He throws 13 touchdowns and 11 interceptions last year. It was an up and down season, but one where he felt comfortable seemingly later in the year, which is always one of the telltale signs that maybe it's about to take off for year 2. And obviously, there's the whole coordinator change that's mixed in there as well. And so, you game it out a little bit, and Nebraska's going to need a lot of production from their starting quarterback this year, as anybody would. But they'll need him to be better in year 2 than he was in year 1 for sure.
Let's take a break and come back and continue this conversation about the upside that we see for Nebraska at the skill positions on offense. I want to talk a little bit about the wide receivers before we get to the running backs, which have more questions. And then we'll also look at the potential downsides that may exist on this part of the team. That is coming up next. Right now, a question from one of our sponsors. Are you looking to optimize your nutrition this year? If you are, Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Keto Plus. Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. You will love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. The convenience is unbeatable. There's no prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. So eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50off and use the code LockedOnCollege50off to get, amazingly, 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's Locked On College 50 off at factormeals.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box.
And a word here. As we welcome you back to segment 2, or should we tell people about Supply House?
Let's tell them about Supply House and then not acknowledge the fact that I just screwed up the production of this podcast.
All right, cool. Let's tell you a little bit about Supply House. You can get the supplies that you need from the site made for skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, electrical work, Supply House is reliable, and it's the way for you to order your products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. So if you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always be talking to a real person. That helps. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage of this, and now it's time for you to do the same. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. And use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order from Supply House. That is Supply House, supplyhouse.com.
All right, now we're actually back to segment number 2. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic, Connor Happer, 1620 The Zone. Thanks for joining us on the Locked On Nebraska podcast on this Monday, March 17th, St. Patty's Day. Not a great weekend of baseball for Will Bolt's team out in the city of Angels. Huskers were swept by UCLA. So 1-5 start for Nebraska in the Big Ten. That is absolutely not the beginning that anyone was hoping for. Tough assignment for sure to go in the second week of league play and have to play the Bruins on the road, but you need to get one of those games. You probably want to win that series if you're Nebraska and you have aspirations at this point or expectations at this point to achieve the things that this team hoped to do in June.
No doubt. I mean, you're 1-5 at the Big Ten. You're kind of, you're on the brink a little bit, right? You need to find a way to stack wins, and it's tough to ask teams to get sweeps in conference series, but Nebraska's going to have to probably pull a couple of them in order to get back to where they want to in the Big Ten standings. I mean, they have to be toward the top of the Big Ten. That's an expectation that we have for the program, and they certainly have to be a team that makes the Big Ten tournament. So right now, not trending great, but maybe a little soon to overreact, I guess.
Yeah. Never too soon to overreact. Let's continue with the conversation about Nebraska's skill spots. Previewing spring practice here at the Locked On Nebraska podcast. So we talked about Dylan Raiola. We talked about Jalen Gramstad, Marcos Davila, TJ Lateef, all of the quarterbacks in camp as we went through what's a potential upside spot for Nebraska. At least it absolutely hopes so. Another place where I think Nebraska has made big strides or hopes to have made big strides in this offseason is at wide receiver. And you have to be a little bit careful here because we were talking about wide receiver as a spot where Nebraska made big improvements a year ago, going into year two for Matt Rhule with the pickups of Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair in the transfer portal. Transfer portal is kind of a crapshoot. You don't know what you're going to get. But Nebraska thinks it knows what it has, and I think it has a little bit better idea because 2 of the 3 transfers who are coming in for Nebraska played for the Huskers wide receivers coach Takeel Shorts, who played for Nebraska's offensive coordinator Dana Holgorsen. So it's like Dane Key and Hardly Gilmore are like 2 steps removed. They're like the grandchildren of Dana Holgorsen in this little scheme that's going on. Isaiah Hunter also, I said Hardly Gilmore and Dane Key. Yes, Isaiah Hunter also coming in from Cal as a transfer. And then the Huskers signed a recruiting class that includes Cortez Mills, who is somebody to watch absolutely this spring at that position. Of course, you have Ja'Cory Barney and Janiron Bonner as like an X factor returning at that wide receiver position, plus some young bodies that Nebraska really likes, like Quinn Clark. Keelan Smith is a guy who's out this spring with an injury, an undisclosed injury, but doesn't sound like he's going to do much, if anything, in the spring. That's a disappointment, the son of former Nebraska great Neil Smith. But otherwise, it's looking, I would say, cautiously optimistic at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think what you said there at the beginning is going to be the question for that group, which is what makes this different from a year ago when they got Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair. Banks was a guy who came in and had the profile kind of Dane Key, where it was just consistent production, right? And Banks probably underperformed expectations, I guess, at Nebraska. And then you have to sort of, parse through whose fault that was. Was that his? Was that a recognition problem? Was that the offense's fault? Was that Dylan Raiola? Like, what was it that sort of led to that breaking down last year? But there's a lot of talent. There's plenty of upside. Obviously, you love the connection that Key has with his former wide receiver coach, who's now his current wide receiver coach. And then, the Holgorsen offense, I think, is the straw that stirs everything on the offense. Like, if you're looking for optimism or upside anyway, you're like, well, I think this offense gets a lot better next year. Not, obviously because of the things that we're going to talk about and preview on this podcast, mainly today, but also Dana Holgorsen and the Dylan Raiola connection and all of those things as well. So I like the group. I did like the group last year. We have to say that, but I do think there's probably a little bit more reason to believe that there's a higher floor this year for this group. That's just off the first blush with all the things combined.
Love that higher floor talk.
Yeah.
So I have a little theory here.
You want to talk about Kool-Aid? Tell me about a higher floor.
I have a little theory here, and it's that when things started to get on shaky ground for Nebraska offensively in the middle of last season, and that would have been really about 4 or 5 games in, Huskers played poorly on offense in that Rutgers game, if you remember that. And we glossed over it because at the end of that game, Nebraska was 5-1. And it's like, wow, the first half of the season is over and Nebraska's 5-1 and is almost 6-0 because it was an overtime loss against Illinois. Like everything is going great. And there were issues, and we probably talked about them some, but I don't know that we talked about them enough. And there was a bye week and Nebraska went to Indiana and got its doors blown off. And all of a sudden, some of these issues that maybe we weren't talking about enough were exposed.
Yep.
And yeah, the offense played better against Ohio State a week after that, but lost the game ultimately, and then lost 2 more against UCLA and USC, which in the middle of that, you had to change to Holgorsen. So things went off the rails for the offense. And I think when things did go off the rails, what Nebraska had to rely on foundationally with its passing game, there wasn't enough. There wasn't enough of like a backbone. You had a true freshman quarterback who was losing confidence, I think, in some of the downfield stuff, and then you had receivers who were primarily new to the program that he didn't have the chance to go out and be the leader for in all of the months leading up to that season. So what you have to hope this year is that you fix those problems, and that one, your quarterback is not going to lose confidence if some things go a little bit sideways in the middle of the season, and two, he's able to develop that rapport with Dane Key, with Nyzia Hunter, with Hardly Gilmore and Cortez Mills. He already has it with Ja'Cory Barney, right. So that if you face struggles, you face adversity, which will happen in 2025, they get through it much more quickly and much more efficiently.
Yeah, we've talked about this on a prior episode before, but it's amazing how little we talk about Ja'Cory Barney.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he is the bright shining star, I think, of optimism, or would be in any other year. Obviously, Nebraska's undergone a lot of changes here, but Barney is still there, and he's going to be such a huge deal for this team. And then so when you have Key and you have Barney, and you're expecting Hunter to step into a spot, we'll see how Gilmore, sort of, is able to step into a role this year with, he'll be depended on, I guess, more this year than he was in his freshman year at Kentucky. I think you go to Mills and Mosey and you're like, all right, what are we going to need from those guys? And how quickly are they able to sort of rise to the occasion and be players for Nebraska?
Quickly, I'll ask this question. Let's say Nebraska starts the season playing a lot of 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end. So you have three wide receivers. Who are the three wide receivers that get the starting nod?
Key, Barney, and Hunter.
Okay.
Right?
I mean, I totally agree with you on Key and Barney. Hunter, he's definitely got the experience. He's only 1 year older than Cortez Mills. And mm-hmm. I don't want to be the guy that's like, all right, this kid from high school. I mean, it's like in fantasy football every year when I draft, and I think the rookies are going to be amazing. And I'm overdrafting on rookies because of their college production. And the fact that I watched him in college. Like Cortez Mills, to me, like he's got the next Ja'Cory Barney written all over him. Maybe Hunter or even Bonner as an older guy gets the nod over Mills in that kind of a set. But I think Mills has got star potential. Not that Hunter doesn't have star potential or that Gilmore doesn't have star potential, but just because of what he can give you, I don't know. He might be the guy. And imagine trying to defend Mills and Barney on the field at the same time. Yeah. It's an enticing thought for Nebraska.
There's a couple wild cards in there for sure. That's why spring is such a huge deal with, Hunter, Gilmore, Mills, right? Like those three, which name do we hear the most? Because like you said, you're going to be in there with Dane Key and Ja'Cory Barney, but then what happens after that? And how strong is it? Like it is, is it Hunter and Gilmore? Is it just Hunter? Is it just Gilmore? Is it just Cortez Mills that needs to all of a sudden be a player for Nebraska in their first year? Like we'll get hints to that, little seeds of the answers to that question in a week.
Mm-hmm. All right. When we come back, running backs, there are questions, there are concerns. We've been over them. We're going to do it again. That's coming up next.
But first, a word from our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook, where March Madness is here and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on all the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. $200 that you could, look at this thing. You could use this anywhere you'd like. There is upsets galore, teams that are underseeded or overseeded, teams that are playing in home court environments and are an 8 seed. Who knows? The things like that might happen that you like in the big dance. So there's things for you to take advantage on. I've got my eye already on a few underdogs this year as we're taking our first looks at the brackets. So why don't you do the same? FanDuel makes it easy to bet them with spreads, totals, game props, and plenty more. And there's always tournament games going on, so there's always a chance for you to stay in on the action. FanDuel, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid out instantly, and there is no waiting around. Head to FanDuel.com today and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. FanDuel. All right, welcome back. Here we go. Segment number 3 here on a Monday. Once again, St. Patrick's Day. We did not wear our green today, sadly.
No. Do you partake in St. Patrick's Day? How do you feel about?
I don't really care about it. I don't really care about it. I do appreciate, and you'll be there to see this today, Mitch. All the Major League Baseball teams, rocking some green hats or green jerseys and stuff like that. That's always fun. The college baseball team, some of them do the same.
Yeah, this is the second time I've been to a spring training game on St. Patty's Day. It happened a few years ago down here in Arizona. Amazingly, not coincidentally, it was also in Arizona. So, you can find a green beer at the stadium, which I'll be happy to do. But otherwise, I'm not like big into the corned beef and cabbage or bar hopping, stuff like that. But to everyone who is, enjoy yourself.
Have fun. Play responsibly. Okay, so first, before we get to the running backs, there's some. Should we tell people what Pat Stewart is getting paid first?
Yeah, this came out on Friday via the Nebraska Athletic Department. He's going to make $800,000 a year. That's Nebraska's new general manager who came over from the New England Patriots. So when Matt Rhule talked about the importance of Pat Stewart's position, this general manager spot, and this is a trend around college football. North Carolina and Bill Belichick, who may have hired Pat Stewart he already had a GM before Nebraska hired Pat Stewart, but there's a connection there for sure between Stewart and Belichick. They won a couple Super Bowls together. Nebraska's taken a page out of the Belichick book by making this move and not $1 million like the Tar Heels are paying Mike Lombardi, their GM, but $800,000, which is on par with what Glenn Thomas, the co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Nebraska, makes. It's behind the OC Satterfield, the DC John Butler, and then the former OC / tight ends coach Marcus Satterfield, who's cashing a big check still because he has that contract. Stewart's above Donovan Raiola. He's above Addison Williams. He's above Mike Eckler, Nebraska's new special teams coordinator. He has a huge amount of responsibility within this program. And part of what he is tasked to do is to place value on players, which I think leads us into this conversation about Nebraska running backs. So Nebraska returning at running back in 2025, led by Emmett Johnson. And then you got a bunch of players who haven't done much of anything at the college level. Some of this has to do undoubtedly with the fact that Nebraska has a certain amount of money in revenue sharing devoted to the running back spot. And much like you see in the NFL, it's a place where they envision getting value.
No doubt about it. It's fascinating. And then you have to match it with the position that you have too, right? With the people who are actually in the room. So it's led by Emmett Johnson and only Emmett Johnson at this point. And then you are going to need some things from other people. So Quentin Ives is the odds-on favorite to be the next guy to get carries in that running back room. We'll see what they're able to get from guys like Mekhi Nelson or even a freshman in Jamarian Parker or Connor Booth. But it's thin, and it doesn't boast a lot of production outside of what Emmett has given you over the last couple of years, which I don't want to gloss over that. Like, Emmett Johnson's been a good player for Nebraska for the last couple of years now, and especially when he gets consistent carries, and he's shown that he could take on that load. Are you going to get a game-breaking, superstar at running back? Probably not. So Nebraska's going to probably approach it from the committee-ish perspective. At least that's what they've done for the last couple of years, and you're going to need more than one guy to take the ball at that position if you're going to do that.
I'm looking at the box score from, and I get it. This game was the high point for Emmett Johnson in 2024. I'm looking at the box score from the Nebraska-Wisconsin game. 16 carries for 113 yards, 7.1 per attempt, long of 19, so that wasn't aided by a 70-yard run. 6 receptions for 85 yards. So 22 touches for Emmett Johnson in that game, and he was just 198 yards, just short of 200 yards of total offense. Like, he's not going to do that every game, or he's going to be an all first team, all Big Ten, and like in the Heisman conversation if that happens. But if you can get like just that player from it, if you can just get that kind of play from Emmett Johnson, sometimes it's going to be 120 yards instead of 200. But they think that they have that guy, I believe, in Emmett. Here's a question though, totally different. I was thinking about this as you were assessing the running back spot a minute ago. Here's a question: the of the 5 that I think we see at the top. So that's Emmett Johnson, Quentin Ives, Mekhi Nelson, Connor Booth, Jamarian Parker, in no specific order after Emmett. If you come out of spring on April 26th or around that time, like at number 5, no matter who you are, how do you feel about your future at Nebraska? Like, even if it's a true freshman, like this, if it hasn't already happened, and I know it already has happened, like, are there going to be true freshmen early enrollees who utilize the spring portal because they were 5th on the depth chart? And how does that impact the coaches really even revealing anything, even internally, about who is 4th and 5th on the depth chart at a given position after spring practice?
Good question. I mean, because it's not uncommon to have a running back who contributes really early on in their career. And if you're behind a bunch of people who are either the same age as you or who are younger than you, let's say you're Mekhi Nelson and you're like, well, turns out I'm behind Quentin Ives, and obviously Emmett Johnson, Quentin Ives, and Jamarian Parker or Connor Booth, or one of those two, or both, whatever. You're like, okay, I don't really. How's this going to work out for me? Because theoretically, these guys stick around. You have to have the writing on the wall. You have to see the writing on the wall a little bit. So, yeah, there might be some of that. There might be a little bit of that. I think Nebraska, probably is in a position at that spot where they probably can't worry about that as much as they want to keep people around. Like, they have to get production from the spot, and that's where you find 2 or 3 guys that are going to take the ball for you this year, and you go from there.
I think they'll lose one. I think somebody because all of the 4 behind Emmett are right now hopeful to be no worse than number 2 at the end of the spring. You don't concede the number 1 spot, but it's understood that Emmett's the top guy and has a big advantage right now. If you're an early enrollee and you did what those 2 guys did, Booth and Parker, in high school, you're hopeful to be number 2 coming out of spring camp. Same thing, obviously, with the returning backs and Ives and Nelson. So there's going to be a couple guys who are unhappy with their spot, if they know their spot, in late April. So I think they'll lose somebody, and I think they'll go into the portal and try to find it back if it's at all possible. Like, if it fits the money, the rev share situation that Nebraska's looking at, they'll find it back. Now, it could be that they get solid play from all of them and nobody leaves, and then they're set for 2025. But to me, that's more that's more like you're dreaming than the alternative where you probably lose somebody or maybe even two, and then you've got to go into the portal and get it back with a little bit more experience than what they have from everybody other than Emmett.
If we were making quickly before we get out of here, if we were making an odds board for who the number 2 running back was going to be, either leaving spring or going into the season, is Quentin Ives a heavy favorite? Is he just a favorite, or is he like, what does that look like?
I don't even think he's a favorite. I mean, he's probably on par, but I don't think he's above any of the other three. The freshman, we're probably overlooking Connor Booth because he's a local guy and he played Class C football in Nebraska, but he did big time things and was highly regarded. Look at the way that Nebraska's recruiting locally right now, as players around Omaha and the metro area and other parts of the state are getting offers from Power 4 programs all over and not from Nebraska, and then say, well, Nebraska offered Connor Booth. That tells you what they think about him in that last class. Same thing with Parker as a guy out of St. Louis. They're high on those two guys. So I wouldn't be shocked if one of those two comes out of spring as the number 2 back. I don't think that Ives has got a leg up on any of the other three.
All right, Mitch. That's it for the offensive skill. Tomorrow we take a look at the big boys, the Hog Mollies.
We're going to project a starting lineup on the offensive line.
Good. So we'll have more Rocco Spindler talk tomorrow on the show. Thanks for listening today. And make it Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball, where it is March and it is tournament time, and you could be the most informed college basketball fan right now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.